A horrific murder out of Indiana when a young mother is found shot in the head and the father of one of her children is charged with the gruesome murder.
Clearly, this is a case where he knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it out, he thought it out.
On Saturday, August 10th, 25-year-old Caitlin Lee was making a TikTok video with a friend inside her apartment. According to police, suddenly she heard a bang on the window. That banging allegedly came from Caitlin's ex-boyfriend, Joshua Thompson, who she shares a 1-year-old son with. But what started as making a fun TikTok with a friend would turn into a deadly tragedy. According to court filings, when Caitlin saw Thompson, she asked, "What are you doing here?" But her friend told investigators in the midst of that question, that's when she noticed the man who was identified as Thompson aiming a gun at the window. He allegedly fired off 2 to 3 shots, which hit Caitlin. Court documents would reveal more horrific details. According to the filing, the murder was captured on the TikTok video. Investigators say when they reviewed the video, it showed Caitlin and her friend laughing and lip syncing to a song before the fatal shooting. Police say when Caitlin was hit, her body fell out of view and smoke was hanging in the room before the video shut off. After the shooting, Thompson fled but left the gun on the ground outside the window. Police say after the murder, Thompson called his brother crying and distraught and confessed that he shot Caitlin in the head, killing her. Thompson's brother reportedly told him to call police and tell them what happened. Thompson revealed to authorities he was in the area for about half an hour before walking to the back of the window and looking inside. He said he spotted his ex-girlfriend by looking through a gap in the blinds at the bottom of the kitchen window and seeing both Caitlin and her friend dancing. Police say Thompson confessed to knocking on the window with the barrel of the gun, causing it to break and shooting Caitlin. And new details just released would reveal more insight into how and why this shocking murder occurred. When speaking to authorities, Thompson reportedly admitted to driving to Caitlin's friend's apartment because he wanted to see if she was there with other men. Caitlin's friend who witnessed the murder told officers Thompson and Caitlin had a toxic relationship and were always at odds with each other. Her friend said Caitlin told her at one point if she were ever found dead, it would be Thompson who killed her. According to a report by WAVE, Caitlin's aunt described how her niece had moved 3 times in the last 4 months, all in efforts to stay away from Thompson after their relationship ended violently. Caitlin's aunt described to the outlet that in April of this year, Thompson allegedly beat Caitlin to the point she was black and blue, and Thompson was previously arrested for the beating. That's when officials issued the emergency protective order. Thompson allegedly acknowledged to police that he was aware of the emergency protective order against him, but chose instead to violate the order. Well, here to join me to discuss more about this case is therapist, trauma expert, and the author of Stolen Childhoods, that's Sherry Botwin. Now, Sherry, thank you so much for joining me this afternoon. This is truly a horrific case. The victim, Caitlin Lee, had an active no contact order with the defendant, and even despite that, he found her at her friend's house while she was having a good time. She was making a TikTok video. She was dancing and lip syncing with her friend, and then he shot at her and killed her. What went through your mind when you were learning about this case?
One of the first things I thought about is even when there's a no contact order, unless there's somebody following the perpetrator around 24 hours a day, he can at any point find her. Especially now, there's so much technology where you can be stalked and not even know that someone is following you. So, again, what I thought about was there's all these laws that we have to try to protect people, especially in situations where there's domestic violence, but it's almost impossible in cases that involve intimate partner domestic violence, which is what I think this is, to really protect the victim in that case. And again, like you said, she was just going about her day, having a good time, and she lost her life because he was able to access her even with the no contact order.
And what stuck out to me was Thompson went over there with a weapon. He spied on Caitlin through a window. So it doesn't seem like this was a heat of passion or anything. To me, it seemed like a premeditated murder. What are your thoughts?
I mean, I think 100% premeditated. He even talked about that when because he reported himself basically. He talked about how he went over, sort of like what he was thinking before. And again, in situations where there's so much emotional volatility, when there's domestic violence and it's partner relationship abuse, all that, whatever he's feeling, whether it's rage, jealousy, spite, if he's an unwell person and he is determined to do what he can to make that person go away, he's going to be able to do that unless he tells someone he's having these thoughts and that that person can then help him not act on them. But clearly, this is a case where he knew exactly what he was doing. He planned it out, he thought it out, and now he's going to lose the rest of his life behind bars. And now there's three children that are going to be without their mom. And how do you explain that to the children that this person, your father, did this to your mother? It's just, it makes me think about the world that we live in. And these types of cases are really the hardest to prevent homicides when there's so much pathology because it happens behind closed doors. And unless, again, he was put behind bars, there was no other way to really stop him if he was planning to end her life.
And another thing that stuck out to me is that an aunt had told a local media outlet that back in April that Thompson allegedly beat Caitlin Lee to the point where she was black and blue all over. He was in county jail and then he got out. What are your thoughts about how the court systems kind of, in your opinion, do you feel like they do a lot to protect victims of domestic violence and of domestic abuse?
I mean, I think of all the things in our country, one area that we really need a lot of work in is protecting victims, especially when it is in the court system. If he's behind bars, why did they let him out? What did he say that made people think that he was not going to be a danger to her or to other people? And I think one of the issues with the court system is they're not really educated about domestic violence. Like they're not required to take hours and hours of training. And I think that that's something that we need to work on. And I know every state is different. Some states have more training than others, but my first thought when I read that was, why did they let him out of prison? He clearly beat this woman nearly to death and he was let free. It almost, again, it invokes a lot of anger in me too, because we're always so focused on the perpetrator, but what about the victim? Like she was already clearly very hurt by this person. When she finds out that he's been let out of jail, one of the things that I read about her was she was constantly moving from place to place, trying to hide from this person. Why should she have to live her last days of her life in hiding? She didn't do anything wrong. And where is the protection for the victim? And where's the protection for the perpetrator? So if you're going to let him out of prison or let him out of jail in the court system, why isn't there sort of like an in between place that we can have that person go where he's required to undergo treatment and be in a facility where there's some type of monitoring so that people can also watch him? Because in a way the system let him down too, because they did not really react in a way that was going to keep him out of prison for the rest of his life.
And the victim, Caitlin Lee, she had a very ominous message for her friend who was a witness to the shooting. And that was that if anything were to happen to me, if I were to end up dead, that Joshua Thompson did this, that he did this. What are your thoughts on that message that, tragically became a true statement?
I mean, I think she knew. She sounds like she was a young but very smart woman who knew that this was a very dangerous man. And sometimes, again, when people are in relationships where there's abuse and it's happening behind closed doors, it's happening between partners, it's not uncommon for them to know at any point their life could end. Because I think what she's saying, even with what she tried to do to protect herself, she's saying, I know that this person wants me dead. And it's almost like she's preparing for her death, which again seems just so sad and unfair, because if he was that dangerous of a man, why was he let out of jail? And I think she probably knew as soon as he was let out of jail, he's going to retaliate. And when there's abuse, every episode gets worse and worse. So he beat her very badly. she knew on some level, I think, that the next thing that's going to happen is he's going to take my life. So I think advocating for herself and saying this is just the truth in my situation. It's so sad.
And kind of going back to how domestic violence and domestic situations can turn into these very tragic and fatal tragedies at sometimes. What are your thoughts on just the overall trajectory from this case? They maybe at one point were in a loving relationship, they had a child together, but then there had to have been some point where it turned violent, it turned abusive. She did everything right by all accounts. We always ask victims in these types of situations, "Why did you stay? Why did you stay?" But she left. She left. She had a no contact order in place that he clearly had violated to the point where he allegedly murdered the mother of his child. But what are your thoughts on kind of that trajectory and how these type of events can occur in these types of cases?
Usually, in cases of domestic violence, it can take the person who's being abused 7 times to actually fully leave the relationship, to make a report. Like you said, she did what she needed to do. She had that no contact order. She clearly told people. So this is a case that should not be, because again, like, unlike some other people, survivors, when they can't leave, it's not just that they're not leaving, they're not telling anyone. So it's disheartening and discouraging to hear that this is the ending of this story. The way I think about it when I, read about the case and the state that it takes place, and I think, I hope that if anything comes out of this case, that the state or other states who are trying to learn more about domestic violence and the danger behind that, that they will use this case and say, what did we do? Where did we go wrong here? What did we miss? What are we going to do different next time to make sure, if we're going to let the perpetrator out of jail, how are we going to make sure that we're looking out for any of the victims, whether it was the children, the wife, or even her family? What are we going to do to make sure this does not happen again? Because again, this is a case that we could learn something from once we get past the horror and the heartbreak.
All right, Sherry Botwin, I really appreciate your time to discuss this case today. Before we sign you off, is there any final thoughts you had that you would like to share?
I mean, the only other thing I want to share is just to keep in mind, again, with domestic violence, it's one of the hardest type of cases to really intervene and prevent things like this happening, because most often it all happens behind closed doors. So what I want to say, if you're out there and you're in a situation where you're not safe, do your best to try and let somebody know. Don't do this by yourself, and just know again that you're not at fault for something that somebody else is doing to you. I really just want to encourage people to not be silent and to try to take all that shame and blame you feel on yourself, and know that there's somebody out there that could probably help you if you let them know that there's something wrong.
All right, Sherry Botwin, thank you again so much for taking time out of your day to interview with me about this story. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Joshua Thompson has been charged with the murder of Caitlin Lee. He's currently behind bars in the Floyd County Jail, held on no bond until his trial, which is slated for March, but is due in court again on September 9th. According to a GoFundMe page, Caitlin Lee will be laid to rest on Thursday, August 15th. Reporting for Law and Crime, I'm Elizabeth Milner.